Good afternoon, and welcome to the second in a series of 3 conversations convened by Young Invincibles to focus on the quickly and dramatically changing workforce landscape for young adults in the United States. I'm Kyle Southern, and I serve as Policy and Advocacy Director for Higher Education and Workforce at YI, where our mission is to empower young adults economically and promote their civic engagement. We, of course, have these conversations in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic that continues across the country. At least 145,000 Americans have now lost their lives to COVID-19, leaving behind communities devastated by their losses. The pandemic's requirement for social distancing has also inflicted incalculable damage on the American economy and put many more lives into personal and financial upheaval. The financial crisis in 2008 was a sharp turning point in US history. Original research by Young Invincibles, 10 years after the Great Recession, showed for the first time that young adults who graduated college with student debt had negative net wealth. Home ownership among young people continues to trend downward, and the financial decline has disproportionately affected young Black Americans, regardless of student debt. In the midst of the COVID crisis, we are again facing another recession, just as some millennials are beginning to recover from the last one. Youth unemployment stands at a staggering 25%. While the last few years were largely good for Americans who were already doing well economically, their growing wealth did little to help put people into a stronger financial foundation. Today, our panel discussion reflects on the systems that hold back too many Americans, particularly those who are Black, Indigenous, and from other populations of color, from realizing the full promise of a prosperous nation. We're joined by Kiki Dunstan, Alumni Coordinator for the New York-based Hudson Link for Higher Education and Prison, John Marotta, Policy Associate for the Center on Labor, Human Services, and Population at the Urban Institute, and Eyang Garrison, Deputy Chief of Staff and Legislative Director for Representative Marcia Fudge. Representative Fudge serves the 11th District of Ohio. As you listen to the conversation today, please make use of the Q&A button on your screen to submit a question for any or all of our speakers. A member of YI's team reading those questions and identifying several to pose in the closing segment program. Please also keep an eye out for periodic poll questions on your screen as well. And we end the conversation by using the hashtag Workforce Reimagined. First, however, Young Invincibles is fundamentally an organization seeking to put the voice of students and young adults at the forefront of these important conversations. To frame our program, I'll now turn it over to Kiara Balleza, who recently completed YI's Young Advocates Internship Program in Illinois. She will share her experience in the labor market leading up to this time and in the uncertain times we now face. So Kiara, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Kiara Balleza. I was an intern for YI, specifically focusing on higher education in Chicago. I was also part of student government at my school, Harold Washington College, where we advocated for student needs within the school, specifically food and housing insecurity, equity, and better mental health services. For the time that COVID has happened, a lot of students obviously have been very impacted by it, specifically putting their dreams to a halt because they have to focus on their families and making sure that they are trying to focus on school, but also just wanting to get a job in order to support that financial need. And personally, for me, it's also been very hard knowing that a lot of the things have been shifted to online, and knowing that a lot of the students within the community are facing a lot of trouble because they do not have access to like computers or Wi-Fi and many other things as well. So personally, I would say that I am very fortunate enough to have access to those things, but I know whether or not, I know that students have like a lot of trouble within those things. And yeah.
Thanks, Kiara, for sharing your story and for being with us today, and looking forward to having you as part of our conversation over the next hour or so. For now, I'd love to turn to you, Kiki, for some reflections. Tell us a little bit about the work that Hudson Link, what you're doing, and kind of what it takes to set up the population you serve for success in the workforce.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Kiki Dunstan. I'm the Alumni Services Coordinator for Hudson Link. Hudson Link pretty much was founded back in like 1998 when Pell was removed from the prison system. And it was actually following the lead of the women at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility to figure out how we should launch a college program without public funding. So we're now currently in 5 correctional facilities. We have 9 college partners. And while we're mainly for higher education, we are now embarking on reentry, which is so major with people that are returning home, with especially with all the reform, social justice reform that's happening. So people are being released, and our role, and my particular role, I have to make sure that I ensure that people who are coming home, they have proper resources. So when they do come to Hudson Link, they can definitely get some type of workforce setup as far as resume writing, some type of interview style tips. They can get clothing, professional style clothing. They do receive a laptop. They set up email accounts, because our men and women are very unique in a sense of they have not been home. So this is a society that has changed far and beyond. So really the main major component would be housing, because people are displaced. They do not, the shelter system is overcrowded, and a lot of our men and women are returning to shelters if they do not have family to take them in. So we basically are, we consider ourselves to be, we are a third-party facilitator between college partners to provide education inside. But now with people coming out, we partner up with community organizations to help us, and reentry organizations to help us navigate our students throughout the system.
Thanks, Kiki. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation with you. John, let me turn to you. We've heard from a current person sort of confronting the issues that we're all dealing with. We've heard from a practitioner standpoint and really confronting the mass incarceration complex. You're at the Urban Institute, which I think is one of the premier sources for social policy analysis and research. Give us a little sense of kind of the work that you all are doing that's most relevant for this conversation, and then based on what you've looked at, what are some good pathways, whether it's through apprenticeships or work-based learning or other programs that can facilitate better access for young people to the workforce?
Sure, and thanks to Kyle and the whole YI team for including me in this. Thanks to Kiara for grounding us at the start of this in your experience. Whenever we talk about policies and systems, I think it's important to always start with the individuals who are impacted by those things. And Kiki, thanks for sharing about your work. So for those who aren't as familiar, the Urban Institute is a nonprofit research, evaluation, and technical assistance organization based in DC, and we work across the country. We recently celebrated our 50th anniversary, and we are a source for unbiased insights to inform policy choices about the well-being of people and places. And we believe that decisions should be shaped by facts, and to have the power to improve public policy and practice, strengthen communities, and transform people's lives. So a lot of my work focuses on apprenticeship, and a subset of that right now is focused on youth apprenticeship. So just a quick definition, youth apprenticeships are structured, longer term work-based learning opportunities for students, and they combine academic and technical classroom instruction with paid work experience and on-the-job learning. So I think some of the things that programmatically lead to successful youth apprenticeships are one, at the kind of school institutional level, offering a diversity of opportunities and types of occupations to young people. So really going beyond a lot of the traditional trades that are often have been historically dominated by white males in those fields, but kind of pushing into different fields like advanced manufacturing, healthcare, IT, and early childhood education is some areas where we've seen a lot of growth in recent years. So I think starting there from the school level, and then with schools and businesses working together from the start in terms of recruiting as well, when they have these opportunities and positions open, it really goes a long way to have that be collaborative and how they actually select who enters these apprenticeships to make sure that it's a good fit for both the student and the employer. And essentially you want that student to kind of go through the same interview or application process that any hire would go through at that company, to hopefully ensure that it's going to be a sustainable relationship. And when we're talking about students, it's also very important for the employers and again, employers and the schools to kind of work together to accommodate the student schedule. So that can take on different forms, whether it's the student going to work certain days and school other days of the week, or splitting up the days where there may be a half day in the classroom and then half day at the workplace. Mentorship is a hugely important aspect of apprenticeship and work-based learning. Mentors support and advise apprentices, and it's really crucial, especially for youth apprentices, because this could very likely be the first kind of professional job that they've had. And so the experience they have there will really inform their kind of workplace habits and expectations going forward in their career. And with mentorship, it ranges from providing practical daily advice, helping them to overcome daily challenges, but also helping them to think about the next steps in their kind of education and career. And then I would say kind of finally, for any initiative, be it institutionally or programmatically, you want to measure outcomes, have goals and be measuring outcomes. And I think in a work-based learning, and especially youth apprenticeship, some example of that could be, completion rate of apprenticeships, attainment of industry recognized credentials, high school graduation rates, of course, retained employment, and of course, earnings. And some of the evidence so far, indicates that there is very promising results on these types of outcomes with apprenticeship.
Great, thanks, John. I'm looking forward to digging into more of all that here in a little bit. For now, let's just shift to more of a sort of macro look, but also a deeply community-focused look, and to ask you, Eyang, to talk a bit about the district that your boss serves and how COVID has been affecting that community, and what the concerns are that are top of the people in your office about better crafting policies that can support people through this time, whether that looks like partnerships with community colleges, business leaders, other stakeholders, try to make a better way forward as we all move through this challenging time.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you answered the question, for me. As you said, I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff and Legislative Director for Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, who represents the 11th Congressional District of Ohio. Most notably, that includes the city of Cleveland and surrounding areas, and the city of Akron as well. I think her district, like so many other urban districts, they were hit pretty hard by the pandemic. I mean, I think the rate of infection was obviously an issue early on. Our governor has been pretty active every day, reporting out, sort of what's happening. And I think just like everywhere, folks were scared initially. And I think folks still are. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of unknown. I can talk a little bit, as we go on in this discussion about some of the things that Congress did in response to the ongoing pandemic. But ultimately, we're dealing with a lot of the things that the others on the panel, touched on. Our schools are still trying to figure out how they're going to reopen. The Congresswoman is very engaged on, what happens there and what that's going to look like. Is that going to be mostly online? Is it going to be a mixed situation? And not surprisingly, a lot of parents in our district, are leaning more towards an online approach. Yes, we're engaging business leaders. Our small businesses, our Black businesses were very heavily impacted by this pandemic. The Congresswoman has been a staunch advocate for, increased assistance for small business loans and things like that. The other thing I should note that, my background is mainly on the nutrition program, so nutrition assistance and access. The Congresswoman sits on the House Agriculture Committee, where she chairs the subcommittee on nutrition oversight and department operations. She also sits on the House Administration Committee, where she's the chair of the elections subcommittee. So obviously access to the ballot box while we're in the middle of this pandemic is top on her list. She also sits on the Education and Labor Committee. So when we talk about distance learning and things like that, those are all things that are of interest for my boss, and we're all in this office thinking about ways to address those issues as they come up. I think on the nutrition side, especially with schools, we're still trying to figure out, what does that look like? How do we still make meals available for young people, even if they're not going into the actual school building? So I think those are all things that we're still trying to figure out, how to be flexible, but also be, prescriptive to provide, some sort of guidance for school districts in this next upcoming school year.
Great. Thank you so much for those comments and giving us kind of that 30,000 foot view, but also seeing how these things really play out in really personal ways in communities like the district. And so maybe it's a good time to transition more to the rest of our conversation. And Kiara, I'd love to turn back to you and think about it in terms of your institution. I think you've been involved with student government and student advocacy. From what you're seeing there, are you feeling that you're getting good communication? Or are there good programs that are setting folks up to transition into a really uncertain employment landscape? Or do you see kind of big gaps that you could be better served?
Yeah, so a lot of the topics that we usually talked about in student government were just, what are the resources that we need in order for students to succeed? And we usually promote a lot of the resources that we have currently, such as the Wellness Center, which promotes a lot of food and housing insecurity that is going around in the CCC district. A lot of it is also in which there's a lot of apprenticeships, or like a career center where we can help students find a job right after college if they don't want to transfer. We also have like a tutoring one, but aside from that, I feel as if Herald does try its best, but I mean, in some parts, we do have the highest number of transfer students, personally from coming to Herald, but I feel as if they need to broaden their resources because we are a very diverse community, such as promoting more students promoting like internships in general, I believe, because a lot of students, again, don't really want to transfer out. And although we do have programs that are involved, we just don't have enough, unfortunately. So I feel as if a lot really circulates towards having jobs currently that need to be in place, and also for the food and housing insecurity, because a lot of our students are very, don't have access to either one of those things, unfortunately. Recently in our Hope Center data, back in the summer of 2019, we found out over 2/3 of our students are food and housing insecurity. So it's a really big deal that we really focus on those certain topics, and we are trying to push forward into making sure that students are not hungry when they go to school, or that students have a house that they can live and continue to move forward, just to have basic needs, essentially.
Yeah, it certainly seems that, you know, every few weeks we get more data that show us what lots of people have been living for a long time in terms of struggling to meet those basic needs. And so it should come as no surprise, but hopefully maybe one positive thing that we can do is to have some more resources dedicated toward meeting those basic needs for people going forward. And so Kiki, maybe to transition back to you and picking up on Kiara's points about the kind of everyday challenges that people face, you serve and work with a population that faces a whole other set of barriers to effective employment. Talk to us a bit about some state or federal resources or even community-based resources that you're able to bring to bear to assist the population you work with, or where are there some big gaps that policy people should be really working on?
Okay, you know, I like to always keep it in a positive flow the best way that I can, but the reality is it's not much. It's not much. So the communities that do help out our population, which is faith-based organizations or some of our community organizations, they really do pull together, because the majority of those people are just as involved individuals, and they know what needs should be met. But the lack of funding makes it very difficult to be effective in those areas. So, you know, when COVID happened, it was just devastating to everyone, but especially for those that are incarcerated, because there's no social distancing. There's not really many measures in place to protect those. It's a very vulnerable population. Now imagine being released into COVID. The people who already were out was just like thrown around. So now you're in a place where everything's shut down, locked down, you have nowhere to go. You don't have access to these resources that maybe you could have went to your local social services department to get access. That's not available to you. So we really relied on private donations from whether it's organizations, whether it's our faith-based organizations, to give emergency funding for those that was released. And we are so thankful for that, because people were unemployed. I mean, they have families to take care of, nevertheless themselves. And that's just a strain within itself. You can't have food, you can't pay your bills, you just don't know where your next steps are. So we really pull together at every avenue to get any resource. I can say, as far as state level, if people are having access to healthcare, if they're getting their benefit cards to be able to go to the doctors, that's in place. If they're able to receive SNAP benefits, that's helpful. Also, if it is cash assistance, but like I said, during COVID, these spots they didn't have access to. And when the stimulus relief came through, I'm so glad they added the section for non-filers, and that made people who were recently released eligible to receive those funds. So it's something that there's a lot of gaps, and I feel like there's ways that we could fix it, but we just have to be on an equal playing field all across the board, and very intentional on what we need for people who are formerly incarcerated and those that are still incarcerated. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, for sure. And you made me think about, you know, one of the main challenges here in terms of getting support on an ongoing basis for a continuous population when it's highly dependent on sort of individual generosity, or these like community-based organizations that want to do good, but they too are facing a really stark economic landscape, right? And so maybe just talk a little bit more about the concerns you have about, like, is there this particular church wants to do this program, but what if they can't actually get people to do that right now, and then it leaves people in the lurch? Like,
No, exactly.
having a systematic approach to this, you're always, I imagine, begging Peter to pay Paul in some sense.
It's so true. And I didn't mention the number because I currently now serve over 1,200 alumni currently, right? And it's about 600 people that are incarcerated that's in our program, that's our college students. So the faith-based organizations that's so helpful, it is always a concern, because what happens if they no longer can provide those essentials, you know? And I know for us at Hudson Link, we are family to a lot of our population. We are their emergency contact person. And I know if we're giving them their toiletry bag or their food pantry bag, it helps for that moment, but it's still not enough to go around for everyone. And eventually that stuff do run out. So it's something that I feel like as a system, we can put something in place that is more than enough. It should be more than enough, that everyone don't have to worry about that. That faith-based organizations are protected. Community organizations are protected. Educational institutions are protected. It's not something that we should be having to stretch so far and beyond just for the well-being of just citizens, period, you know? And for our college community, whether they're incarcerated or not, the last thing you want to worry about is financial debt, or how are you gonna, you have all this debt and now you're looking for a job and you can't get it. Because one thing is, our alum, they are educated. They're coming home with their associates, bachelors, even some with master's degree. It's the lack of opportunity and resource sometimes. So just getting people to understand that and to just have something in place where people can make it a little bit easier for people to come home and be okay. I don't think we could always have an answer for that. It's every case per person, you know? Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
I want to switch back to you, John. Now, having heard about those real problems in the system of network and support for one population, you spoke earlier about kind of the key components that make different programs work for individuals, but kind of taking up on Kiki's point and Kiara as well, it takes people to put these systems together. And so from your work and research, what's some of the key connective tissue that can bring together all the different players who can make these programs more sustainable and fill in the gaps that we just heard highlighted?
Well, I think, well, one, when you look at kind of our workforce and education systems kind of writ large and the different players involved, it's still pretty siloed. I think it's trending in the right direction, and there are examples of places that are doing better in terms of kind of integrating workforce and educational systems. And I think the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act really helped with that these past 5 years in bringing business, labor, education, elected officials, economic development, workforce agencies, and vocational rehabilitation agencies kind of all together to not just be more aware of what each of those different systems are doing, but to work together in concert toward shared aims. Because I think oftentimes a lot of those systems are serving the same people and may have similar goals, but they're not really working together. We recently did a case study of Iowa's statewide initiative to expand youth apprenticeship in the state. And I think some of what we learned from those conversations is you really need strong partnerships between high schools and businesses and the expanse of colleges and businesses as well. and you really need strong state leadership, along with from the governor's office to various state agencies. So in the case of Iowa, it was really Iowa Workforce Development, which is the state workforce agency, the Economic Development Authority, the Federal Office of Apprenticeship field office in Iowa provided a great deal of support to different entities in the state. And the community colleges and partnering to provide dual enrollment opportunities to students as part of their apprenticeships is really important. And then kind of business intermediaries where businesses can come together to talk about, kind of collectively express what their needs are and work together to inform what the kind of talent pipeline looks like in their region. And, you know, as Kiki mentioned, funding is just so central to this. You can have the right partners together. You could have people who are supporting this and agreeing on goals, but if you don't have sustainable funding, then you're probably not going to achieve very much. And that, you know, is both state and federal funding. So in this case of Iowa and their youth apprenticeship initiative, the state funding was able to provide support and resources to schools and employers to help build out their apprenticeship programs. And then federal funding, you know, helped to support a lot of those state agencies that were then helping with kind of the back end and technical assistance to schools, colleges, employers, and sort of the various entities involved. So you know, those are some of the things that are important to sustaining those relationships and those systems. I think I'll stop there right now.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. And I appreciate your point about the importance of state investment in this. But of course, we know that states are reeling from the lost revenues they're facing right now and their responsibilities for balanced budgets in the face of that, which leads many to look here to Washington and to our members of Congress. And Eyang, I'll turn back to you for this next question in terms of thinking about where federal solutions are available. And you talked earlier about the Congresswoman's various positions and your expertise around nutrition and other things that are really critical for supporting people. So it seems like ages ago that the House passed the HEROES Act. Any minute now, or maybe even in the last few minutes, we'll maybe see some new legislation in the Senate. But maybe share a bit about the work that your team and the Congresswoman are doing in terms of thinking about the investments at the federal level that need to be made so that states are able to continue the kind of work that John's been highlighting to better support people.
Ooh, so rub it in. It has been a while since we passed the HEROES Act, and we're still waiting on the Senate to take action. As we are with lots of other pieces of legislation, but that's another conversation for another day. Soon after, there was an emergency declaration put in place. Congress, we got to work, and I've never experienced, I don't think any of us have experienced anything like this, but to be on the Hill during this time has really been, something that will stay with me for a long time, because I think we all really came together. And in all honesty, behind the scenes here in the House, in a bipartisan way, to move legislation really quickly. Now, mind you, members say, what they say on the floor, but, at the staff level, we really did work well across the aisle to provide relief in areas that really run the gamut. So I'll kind of run through some of the key things that we did that were on, my boss's priorities. So in the nutrition space, we suspended work requirements for able-bodied adults without dependents. And a lot of young people, a lot of young college students fall into this category. Those are people who are age 18 to 49, who don't have any children or dependents in the home. As it relates to SNAP, they are required to, they can receive SNAP for a 3-month period within a 36-month time frame without meeting some additional work requirements. But after that 3-month period is over, they have to meet additional work requirements in order to receive those benefits. We suspended those requirements. Obviously, if that population of people are not able to work, it doesn't make sense to require them to meet those requirements. We also gave states the ability to provide emergency SNAP benefits, which is basically providing benefits up to the maximum allotment for a household size. That was really important to do. We did this is all in the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which is the second piece of legislation that we passed here in Congress. We provided more money for food banks. I think we all have seen the pictures of long lines of food banks from around the country. We plugged in a lot of money into food banks, $400 million in one bill, I think another $450 million in another bill, and $150 million in the HEROES Act. I think we all recognize the role that food banks have played in our communities, including in my boss's community. The Greater Cleveland Food Bank has worked tirelessly. They have had lines of cars that have spanned 4 miles. And so the Congresswoman is grateful for the work that they do. We also gave lots of flexibilities for school districts to serve meals to students in what we call non-congregate settings rather than serving them through the regular school lunch, school breakfast program, giving them the flexibility to serve meals through the summer food service program, which means that schools then had the flexibility to allow kids to come and just pick up the meals, or parents can come and pick up the meals for their kids. They can drop the meals off at certain sites, or in some districts, if they have the staffing, they can actually do direct delivery to home. So gave a lot of flexibility in that. My boss also co-wrote with Congressman Bobby Scott, who's the chair of the Education and Labor Committee, a new program that's called Pandemic EBT, which is basically EBT benefits for households with children who, if not for the closure of their school for at least 5 consecutive days, would have received free or reduced price meals. So this is an EBT card. It's sort of similar to what you would get in sort of SNAP or general cash assistance. But these benefits are for food. And so this is sort of another supplement to making sure that kids are getting sort of a replacement for those meals that they're missing, when schools are closed. That is something that we're looking to expand in the HEROES Act. And we're hoping to see an expansion when we pass another COVID-19 relief package. That's a pretty big provision. It's something that most states have taken up, and we're really proud of that. There was also more flexibilities in WIC as well. So that sort of covers the nutrition space. As it relates to just overall COVID-19 relief, we provided, emergency paid leave, additional unemployment insurance benefits. We provided direct cash assistance. I think Kiki talked a little bit about that a little while ago. That's obviously very impactful for folks at certain income levels. Provided additional relief for small businesses that were tremendously hurt by this pandemic. And we're still trying to figure out ways to provide relief to some of those entities that don't necessarily qualify for small business loans. So, we're the entertainment industry. I mean, there's so many, my boss talks about, like, what about the musicians and what about, those people who, can't, they get their money from, performing at venues that are now closed, and folks are now scared to attend those concerts. So what about those people? And so I think we're still trying to figure out ways to provide relief to some of these industries that maybe weren't covered in the last relief packages. We also included a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions. I think those were pretty important to include. My boss really wanted to make sure that those were included in our relief packages. We also postponed repayment on student loans through the end of the fiscal year. So obviously that makes sense. Give folks more time for jobs to come back. We also money for transit agencies, like you said. There's so many industries that have lost revenue. We want to make sure we keep those jobs. A lot of people in those jobs are Black and brown, so we want to make sure we're plugging money into those industries to make sure that those jobs stay around for a long time. We plugged money into election security. I think we're all sort of wondering what's going to happen in November and what that election is going to look like. And again, those conversations are ongoing, but I think we want to make sure that states have what they need in order to make sure that we all still continue to have confidence in our elections, even in the midst of COVID-19. In the HEROES Act, we provide more money for state and local governments. In our district, we've heard from locals that are, concerned about the lack of availability of funds to put towards revenue losses. So we made sure to correct that in the HEROES Act. And so, yeah, I mean, there's so much more in there. There's money in there to help folks, pay their utility bills. So I think it's sort of that these are large funding bills. But yeah, so we're still continuing to fight things are still coming up. Like I said, we're still hearing from entities that need relief. We're still trying to figure out what's going to happen with schools, so that we can understand how best to formulate policy that will address the needs of schools, however that looks. So yeah, the work is ongoing, but we hope to see another relief package soon.
Sure, and huge systemic challenges that have been referenced for a long time that get put into stark relief. One other thing that I'm mindful of that seems to be kind of a third rail, and John, I'll turn back to you on this, because you've done some research on it, is thinking about the fact that even without a public health crisis, lots of folks who enter the workforce who are working at minimum wage are earning a level that hasn't been raised in over a decade, since the last Great Recession. Talk to us a little bit about what you found in terms of research on minimum wage laws and how they can affect economic and racial equity, and maybe what we need to know more about.
Sure. So yeah, last year I worked on a report that looked at minimum wage through the lens of state preemption, which has been another big issue in the last decade or so, of states preventing localities from creating minimum wage laws and lots of other types of laws. So through that lens, I kind of looked at what the research has found about the impacts of minimum wage, particularly those that have been implemented in municipalities. So one thing that I think is important is just who earns the minimum wage. And based on data from the current population survey from 1979 to 2014, about 8% of all workers and 40% of working teens earned within about 10% of the minimum wage where they live. But teens have been comprising a decreasing share of those workers earning near the minimum wage. So among workers earning within 10% of the minimum wage, the share of teens has fallen from about 32% in 1979 to 23% in 2014. And then looking at impacts, the minimum wage literature is vast and complex, and you really need a PhD in economics to understand it, which I don't have, but I did my best. So there's a lot of disagreement and heterogeneity in approaches to sussing this stuff out. But there is pretty widespread consensus that higher minimum wages lead to higher earnings, especially for less educated workers, and particularly for teens and young adults. And studies have also pretty consistently found that higher minimum wages are associated with reduced wage inequality to some extent. And a major talking point that gets thrown out when folks are opposed to minimum wage increases is that it will result in significant job losses. And this is kind of a major point of conflict and disagreement in the literature, but by and large, that hasn't really been found in studies. Generally, what's been found is pretty insignificant impacts on overall job levels when the minimum wage is increased. And then looking at it kind of through a racial justice lens, some research that was commissioned by the city of Los Angeles when they were thinking about raising their minimum wage a few years ago, found that the increase to $15 an hour would disproportionately benefit workers of color, who represented 80% of those earning minimum wage in the city. And the authors of that study found that more than half of the workers in LA making minimum wage are also Hispanic. And so I think you find that those trends largely replicated in other cities across the country. And so that is an important aspect of raising the minimum wage.
Thanks, Sean. Kiara, I'll turn back to you. We just heard a lot of information about what Congress has been working on and kind of the research literature about wages, particularly for people early in their career. I'd just be interested in kind of your reflections of what's resonated most with you in terms of at the policy level or kind of the knowledge gaps about what we need to do to go forward and better support you, your classmates, other young people.
Yeah, so I feel as if what Eyang was really talking about, well, there's like a whole list of a lot of great things that are being really provided to a lot of people who really need it, and I really appreciate it. I feel as if it does meet at least some of the things that what students need in particular, so specifically the food insecurity that's currently going on. But I would say that a lot of the things also don't really pinpoint a lot of healthcare as well. I mean, during a pandemic, there is going to be a lot of burden within a lot of families, especially those who don't have access to insurance or anything like that, to be infected or to just have not enough funds, because a lot of hospitals are very expensive, unfortunately. So I feel as if we really have to talk about the affordability, because it's always been a problem since like forever, that a lot of, when you ever go to the hospital, just like a big bill right after it, even though if you're not as sick or even have the COVID or anything like that, then it's ridiculous. And especially if you're undocumented as well, then how are you gonna be willing to afford any of this stuff either? I do really appreciate a lot of the food programs and the huge donations to food banks. However, I feel as if there has to be more accessibility to housing, because although it is really a complex topic to really understand and how to really maneuver around, housing is a really big thing. You can't really offer food to people if you don't have the house to cook it for. I mean, it's just really plain illogic right there. And I also believe that a lot of the programs are not really accessible to a lot of undocumented families as well, which is a really big thing. And although it is unfortunate that they can't have access to it, I mean, the RISE Act is available. And if that could be possible for students to apply for financial need, then why can't there be a program for undocumented families or parents that should be available to these offers as well. I also feel as if there shouldn't be a lot of like, how do you say, like a few days of just having resources. I feel as if there should be more stability into these type of things. I was aware that she brought up the EBT program, but that was only for like a minimum of 5 days, I believe. And I know a lot of things are really in a few month period, including like the SNAP program. And I just feel as if a lot of people should just have the comfort of not knowing where they should do next because time is running out. And coming from my college, since we are a very diverse community, we do have a lot of veterans, international students, students with disabilities, parents especially that really need these type of services, not just for themselves, but often for their kids or even for their family members who often lost their jobs too. It's just really a lot for all of us. And I understand that. It's very overwhelming to understand what should we really focus on. And I really do believe that a lot of the things are good. I just feel as if we should focus more on maybe the apprenticeships. I feel are a really good idea because during this time also, since there is a recession going on, there's a lack of jobs going on. And also just having like quality jobs. I mean, there shouldn't be a debate on whether or not we should have the minimum wage like at a certain point at all. It should be at a stable point where people are not working 3 or more jobs, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all stretched enough, so I certainly agree with you. And thanks, Kiara, for those comments and reminders. Eyang, from a policy perspective, wanted to give an opportunity for you to respond, and then Kiki, I have another question for you in a moment when I come back to you. But before that, I want to remind folks, we do have the Q&A box open, and as soon as I get through these couple of quick asks, I want to definitely get into the audience questions. So feel free to keep those coming. I know we have a few in the queue already, but we're open for questions from the audience. But Eyang, I'll give you a chance to respond to Kiara and then go back to Kiki for one closing question for the panel part.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you. And Kiara, thank you for all of that. I couldn't agree, with you more on really everything that you said. The one thing I wanted to make sure that was clear on the pandemic EBT provision is that you're qualified if your school is closed for at least 5 days, but it covers, it expired at the end of the school year, but it covered from, whenever your school closed in March through the end of the school year. We're fighting to expand that to the HEROES Act expands that to fiscal year 2021. So but the trigger is the school closure. As long as your school is closed for at least 5 days, then you're eligible to receive, these EBT benefits for however long the duration of that school closure is. So I just wanted to make sure that part was clear, but I completely agree with all the other sentiments that you expressed.
Thanks for that, Eyang and Kiki. So something that was in my mind as Kiara was talking was, one, the challenge of juggling a variety of different jobs, but I know that you and your colleagues are probably all managing 3 to 4 jobs with just one title. And so I just wanted to come back to you in terms of thinking about, we have a really diverse audience of advocates, workforce development folks, people who also wear a lot of hats. Talk to us a little bit, if you can, about how you manage both meeting the immediate needs of serving your students and alumni with also being an advocate for them and being parts of conversations like this that are really more policy oriented and getting their experiences and voices into those conversations. Like, how do you navigate those different spaces, and what guidance might you have for people who are coming into this conversation from different angles?
Oh, absolutely. Before I answer that, I just wanted to tell you all just one thing. When we were talking about minimum wage, I just wanted to let you guys know that, when people are incarcerated, they're making a minimum of 10 cents per hour, maximum 25 cents per hour. This has not been changed in forever. of beginning of time, it is impossible for people to maintain themselves. It's basically deciding if you're going to eat or you're going to purchase your toiletries if you can. So it's something that policy-wise, it's something that we need to revamp altogether, because you cannot survive. And we're talking about people who have restitution, money is being deducted, people who have to pay child support and so forth, that are living off state wage. It's something that we really need to revisit on that. So back to answering your question. And so immediate needs, basically, it really is for per case basis, right? So I'll know who's coming home, and they'll come to the office, or they'll reach out prior to them being released, and I'll try to connect with families or any community member that has been connected with them inside to provide them services, and try to do a soft handoff to organizations, because I'm very protective of our population, because I just don't want any further exploitation or their needs not being met. So that's the way how I deal with that. As it comes in, I deal with it. It's a constant, it's a 24/7, to be honest with you. I know people have office hours. There's no such thing as Hudson Link has office hours, especially alumni services, because someone could be released tomorrow and we didn't know, because with policy changes, or anything can happen, and we just have to be ready for that to receive them. And as a whole, as an organization, we just take it as it goes, and we try to empower our students, which they're already empowered enough, but try to get them involved in civic engagement and knowing their rights. Once voting was restored here in New York for people who were convicted of felonies to be able to vote, it was huge. We wanted to uplift all voices to let them know their rights, despite any type of tactics that was trying to prevent people who were formerly incarcerated from voting, to know that they knew their rights, to just be educated on it, and to just get out there and be the change that they wanted to see. So we partner with many organizations to uplift that, whether it's your 2020 census, whether it's getting ready for November's election, awareness for people that are inside to exercise your rights in there, as well as when you come home. So it's a combination of things. We just want people to be empowered, and education is key, because if you don't know about it, there's nothing you can do. So we try to keep people informed, have direct intention, and also accountability as well. So if we're dealing with organizations and you're saying you do X, Y, and Z, we as an organization expect you to follow through on that. We prefer quantity as opposed to, we prefer quality as opposed to quantity. And that means so much more for us. And we are a family. So it's not, it is, of course you have to deal with business and finances, but the main support is that you're people first. You're human first. We understand you, we feel you, we get it. Because 80% of our staff is formerly incarcerated. So everyone gets it. It's not a blind spot. It's not like, oh, we don't know that this happens. We feel it, we live it, we breathe it every day. So that gives us a leg up. And the conversations that's not had in certain forums, we bring that to light that people aren't aware of. And and there's difference in facilities, from women facilities to men facilities. It's not an equal playing field. There's lack of resources all the way around the board, and we just want to bring that connectivity and equity for everyone that's involved, because you're being released. We're coming back to your communities. We're your neighbors. We're your coworkers. We're up there in Capitol Hill. We're doing it. So we need to just constantly just keep that pushing forward as a community.
You're using the word connectivity, and then in connection with those personal relationships, and that sense of family is so important. But there's a different context of connectivity that a lot of questions have bubbled up in our Q&A box, and yes, you and your colleagues are no stranger to the challenges of internet connectivity in terms of delivering content. But I wanted to kind of open it up for anyone that wanted to respond. We had a couple of questions. One early on about an internship that had transitioned to a virtual format for the summer. But of course, we know many students struggle with having reliable high-speed internet, the kind of connection that can allow them to be successful in those kinds of programs, even beyond internships or externships that are reliant on internet. We know that many students have struggled with connectivity in traditional academic settings. So we'll just open it up to anyone who wanted to respond to think about kind of the challenges of offering and transitioning programs to online. And then two, whether it's from the kind of legislation that has been proposed in Congress on expanding broadband to make up the digital divide. What are some thoughts that the group has about this whole issue about connectivity and giving better access to people to the essential mechanism to stay on track, whether it's for an internship or a job, or in some cases, or for their academic work? So anyone wants to weigh in, feel free to just jump on.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. You know, I think we're trying to figure that out too. You know, we're a popular place for people to come and want to have an internship experience, and I think we're struggling with, you know, sort of trying to figure out what that looks like, you know, for our interns and also for our fellows as well. I think, you know, it's important for us to give our interns and our fellows remote devices. So, you know, if you have the capacity to do that, you know, we try to do that. We haven't run into the issue of interns lacking, you know, internet access, but I feel that if we were to run in that, we would try to adjust. I think we're all going to have to be flexible, and if that means hosting calls by phone as opposed to using Microsoft Teams, you know, those are things that we're going to have to do, and we're trying to get creative with the types of projects that we're having our interns do and the types of projects we're having our fellows do. I think we're all, it's not even just our interns, it's the staff too. I think we're all sort of trying to figure out how to do our jobs effectively virtually. So I think it's an adjustment period. I think it's just important to be flexible. If you have the ability and the financial backing to give your interns, you know, remote devices, I think you do that. I think you talk to them. I think you talk to them about, you know, what sorts of access do they have? What are they interested in? And how can you best, you know, interact with them in a way that's meaningful so that they feel like they're really getting something out of their experience, without sort of feeling like, you know, I'm out here, I have an internship, but I don't really know, you know, what's going on with it. So I think constant communication and getting feedback as well, asking for feedback. So are you feeling engaged? You know, what are some things that would be helpful for you? What are some things that you're interested in? I think asking those questions, you know, is important. I think and it also lets your intern, your fellow, your staff know that you care and that you're interested in tailoring how you work to best fit, you know, what their current needs are.
Thanks. I've got a couple other questions I'll get to, but I'll leave this, maybe if anyone had like one more thought to add on that, or we can transition.
I just real quickly, I just want to add that at Hudson Link, we do provide internships for students that come in to work with our organization. And as far as connectivity, we are constantly looking for laptops, like donated laptops in, because this is what we give our men and women who are coming home, because so they can be connected. And it takes some time for them to, I always call it the Obama phone, but I'm sure it's probably called Access or something, but we call it the Obama phone.
It's called Lifeline.
Oh, well, thank you very much. See? Until they get that, they are able to have the laptop to be able to, you know, connect with me or anyone else, at least through correspondence. And one of the great things, even though it's stuff attached, that tablets were issued inside the correctional institutions, except for just, you know, rates are not favorable, it's just very exploitative of our people who are incarcerated. So it makes it hard to afford, but that is one of the parts of connectivity for us.
And just to add one, oh, sorry, go ahead, Yang.
I'm sorry.
Well,
yeah.
no, John. Before you say what you're going to say, I just wanted to touch on Lifeline really quick, is because that is something that my boss is very supportive of, the Obama phones, because a very small fraction of those are eligible to receive Lifeline benefits are actually participating in the program. I think it's like less than 10%. So I think we're trying to figure out ways to make sure that eligible population of people know that this program exists, that you can get a subsidy on your telephone and internet access. Those are folks that are on SNAP and other means tested programs. So I think I'm glad that you mentioned that program, because I think a lot of folks don't even really know it exists. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you.
And I was going to make one quick point, mainly to reinforce something that Eyang said about creativity. I think that's like really key right now, because this are such odd times, and it's not just an economic downturn, but this public health crisis has created so many more obstacles than many organizations are used to dealing with. And I think whether it's an intern, for instance, if it's an internship or a skills training program, organizations to think about places that are not infrastructure and facilities that aren't being used right now, that could maybe facilitate some of these activities, like really large spaces where you could spread people out that you normally wouldn't have to use and aren't currently being used. So things like that. Yeah, I think just creativity is very critical right now.
Thanks, John. I see we've got a poll question that we just got some good results for, in terms of asking a top priority for the next round of legislation. And together we see that most folks top priorities are on extending the CARES and employment benefits and on a new round of stimulus payments. No responses on tax credits for skills training. So this is a decidedly unscientific poll, but I think it gives us a pulse on where folks are in terms of what I see from that is the need to get cash into the pockets of people right now, which really demonstrates the urgency that a lot of people are feeling. So we've only got about 7 minutes left, but I'd love to pose a similar question to each of you. I know that it's impossible to pick one thing that you would most do to better support young people in the workforce right now. But to pose that impossible question to you, what do you think would be the top thing to do right now to better support young people as we navigate this really challenging time? And Kiara, I'm gonna say the last word for you. So maybe we'll start with you, Kiki.
Okay, so the number one thing, just wow, support. Well, it would just be if you have access to any type of resources for anyone, I feel like if you just like reach out, and I feel like people who are just as involved is usually the afterthought. When you're creating these policies and initiatives, just put that as priority order if you can, if it's possible, because it should be all fairness all across the board, right? And I just think it's just an afterthought with anything, whether it's healthcare, mental health, job, employment, education. It's really the afterthought. I think it needs to be more put in the forefront.
John?
Well, I'll slightly cop out and just quickly first say I agree with the poll results, and it's just the most urgent thing right now is putting cash into people's pockets. CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, just came out with a report saying that the recession likely won't end until 2021. So this economic crisis isn't going away anytime soon, and we simply need to provide cash assistance to people so that they can survive. but I would be remiss to not end on a note advocating for work-based learning and apprenticeship. So I would say that that's really critical for schools and businesses to think through. And you know, unfortunately, we're far from taking apprenticeship to scale in the United States. In some European countries that have really advanced apprenticeship systems, I mean, upwards of 30% of people in the workforce have gone through an apprenticeship. But in the U.S., usually right now, it's about 0.3% of our workforce is in an apprenticeship. But you know, throughout our work, whether it's doing research or technical assistance, you know, we constantly hear really inspiring stories about how apprenticeship has, you know, really changed someone's life and altered their trajectory. So recently, my colleagues did a case study about CareerWise Colorado, which is a youth apprenticeship intermediary, and they spoke with a young apprentice there named Monique Lane. She's in the third year of her apprenticeship at Pinnacle Assurance in Denver. And since she started, she earned her diploma, her associate's degree, and kind of decided about the career that she wants to pursue. And she told us that she had always wanted to go to college, but never thought she would be able to afford it, and assumed she would have to work like retail and service jobs in order to even have some money to survive that period. And now through the apprenticeship, she's been able to earn her associate's degree at no cost, and is well on her way to earning a bachelor's degree. So, I mean, there are examples like this everywhere. And if we need to continue investing, I think, in apprenticeship especially, and work-based learning more broadly to continue these types of outcomes.
Thanks, Sean. Eyang, and I know we're running short on time, but we'll just do a quick hits for you and give the last word to Kiara.
Yeah, sure. So I agree with John. You know, money in everyone's pockets, I think, is probably the number one thing, just so that folks can make ends meet during this uncertain time for so many. I think also through, you know, increased funding for safety net programs, cash assistance like SNAP, those things are really important. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the need for the SNAP increase that's in the HEROES Act. So we want to see that pushed through. Obviously, another stimulus payment, we'd like to see that. So, you know, but who knows what we'll see the Senate come up with. The other thing I wanted to mention was that there was a question about, you know, how do we voice our concerns about, you know, policies that we think might not be helpful that we're hearing are on the table for the next COVID-19 package. And my response to that is, you know, to contact your member, contact your senator, you know, let your voice be heard. What are the things that you're seeing in your community? Your representatives work for you. So I cannot stress that enough. So I before I started working on the Hill, I had no idea that you could contact your member of Congress and you know, they could actually listen to you. And we hear from constituents every day. So I encourage people to reach out to their senator, reach out to their member, even if you don't necessarily, you know, work on the Hill or work in some of these organizations that we all represent. You writing your member of Congress, you calling your member of Congress gives you a seat at the table. And my boss always says, if you don't have if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So I think it's really important that we're always keeping that in mind, and, you know, make yourselves part of the process and make your voice heard, especially during these times.
Thanks so much. And Kiara?
I mean, I agree with everyone. I feel as if money is just like so important right now. Without the funding, I feel as if nothing would ever really exist, or things would just be very unstable for a lot of people, especially for students. And I feel as if just things have to be more equitable for everyone. I think that's just like the really important part, that everything is very fair. Well, the people that need it the most need the most funding. I think this is what I think. This is my answer. I think we need funding for. We just need funding. That's it. Yeah.
It's a great headline to end on. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists today. I want to thank you, Eyang and John, Kiara, and Kiki. I also want to thank everyone that joined us today for this important conversation. Next week, please plan to join us for the third and final session of our workforce series. On July 30th, we'll address the topic, looking into the future of youth employment. This session will also conclude YI's three series of virtual roundtables from this summer, which we launched in May to consider some of the most pressing questions confronting higher education, healthcare, and the workforce for young people nationwide. We'll tackle issues next week, including the pace of automation and the changes employers will need to make to attract and retain talent. Be sure to register and join us at this time next Thursday. Finally, I want to offer special thanks to our YI team who made today's program possible, especially Morgan Diamond and Zachary Williams, who were both instrumental in conceiving the program and developing our discussion questions. Please follow us online at younginvincibles.org, as well as on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we'll see you all next week. Thanks again for joining us.